Hello and welcome to Inside the Americas. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Buyahi. Coming up on this week's programme. In Mexico, substandard buildings which collapsed during the country's recent earthquake thrust corruption in the urban planning sector firmly into the spotlight. Revelations of at least 8 settlements over producer Harvey Weinstein's alleged sexual misconduct highlight discrimination in the movie industry. And Canada says it will pay $800 million to compensate its so-called stolen children. We begin in Mexico, where 3 weeks after an earthquake left almost 400 people dead, the country is learning some painful lessons. During the quake, several buildings that did not meet basic safety standards collapsed. At least 4 had illegally placed billboards on top. The revelation placing corruption in the urban planning sector once again firmly into the spotlight. Our correspondent sent us this report.
September 19th, 1:14 p.m. in Mexico City. About 40 buildings collapse when a 7.1 magnitude earthquake strikes, causing 228 fatalities in the capital. After the initial shock came the questions. Why did they collapse? The oldest of these buildings had already resisted more violent quakes, like the one in 1985, while the most recent buildings should have been constructed following strict seismic codes. Jorge Negrete thinks he has the answer.
The first thing they removed was a billboard that massively obstructed the rescue efforts because it was a very wide and heavy structure.
Here, on the corner of Torreon Street, 17 people died under the rubble.
Shortly after the building collapsed, this was how they found the billboard. It was about 13 or 14 meters wide and 8 or 9 meters tall.
Jorge estimates that it weighed at least 7 tons. Undeclared extensions, hoardings, rooftop terraces, and other renovations can sometimes still be seen among the ruins, like at the Rebsamen school, where 19 children and 9 adults lost their lives. The principal had ordered the construction of an apartment on the roof of the building without declaring it. Since 2010, an urban planning law prohibited the placement of billboards on the roofs of buildings.
There are economic interests at stake because the urban advertising market in Mexico City is worth 4 billion pesos, so the authorities keep dragging their feet when it comes to enforcing the rules.
We made contact with Jim, the urban advertising firm that placed the billboard on the building on Torreon Street.
Hello, this is Rim Urban Advertising. Yes.
We pretend to be potential clients.
Okay, I'll pass you on to a member of staff who will attend to you.
She hangs up on our first attempt, so we try again.
I think we were cut off when you were going to pass me on to...
Okay, I've taken down your details, and I'll pass them on to an executive who will reply by email.
Like almost all of the urban advertisers and construction firms linked to the 19th of September disaster, Jim is staying conspicuously quiet. According to this architect, the carelessness of these businesses, and of the owners who authorized these rooftop additions, was partly responsible for the high death toll.
The problem with billboards is that they sway back and forth. So if the building isn't designed to carry this load and it doesn't have a strong structural base, then this can certainly cause it to collapse.
Years can go by between the placing of an illegal billboard and the authorities ordering its removal. So despite the trauma caused by the earthquake, Mexico City's urban landscape remains riddled with these very visible dangers.
Next, as the list of women claiming that movie producer Harvey Weinstein sexually harassed or assaulted them grows, information that at least 8 women have previously reached settlements over his alleged misconduct has emerged. Well, the revelations are highlighting once again the discrimination that women often face in the movie industry. Charles Pellegrin has the details.
TV reporter Lawrence Sivan only met Harvey Weinstein once, but the trauma of that encounter meant she kept quiet for a decade.
That's where he cornered me in this vestibule and leaned in and tried to kiss me, which I immediately rebuffed and said, whoa, whoa, whoa. I had no idea that that's what this was. I'm sorry, I have a very serious boyfriend and I'm not interested. And I thought it would end there. But that's when he blocked the entrance or exit for me and said, well, then just stand there and be quiet. And he immediately exposed himself and, began pleasuring himself.
This story was just one of many similar reports that made international headlines and led to Weinstein being quickly fired from the movie studio he founded. Some in the industry are now ringing the alarm and asking Hollywood's male-dominated culture to change.
In terms of the community and the culture in Hollywood, this is a gigantic wake-up call to a lot of people, I think. And it's a sign that the culture is moving to a place where you can't get away with this.
Weinstein is not the only powerful movie industry figure to have attracted controversy because of allegations of sexual violence in recent years. His name can be added to a list that includes Bill Cosby, Woody Allen, and Roman Polanski. Women in show business not only have to deal with an environment where this behavior is often swept under the rug, they also have to deal with unfair working conditions.
Gender equality has been a very major problem for the industry for years, and increasingly is under pressure to do something about it, whether it's pay equality or equality of opportunity behind the camera.
In an op-ed for the New York Times, Lena Dunham, the creator of HBO's Girls, called on Hollywood's men to take a stand and break this silence.
The reason I am zeroing in on the men is that they have the least to lose and the most power to shift the narrative, and are probably not dealing with the same level of collective and personal trauma around these allegations.
Women in Hollywood are facing an uphill battle. Between 2015 and 2016, the percentage of women directors in the industry went from 9% to 7%.
Our image of the week comes from Northern California, where huge wildfires have been sweeping through the wine region, burning tens of thousands of acres of land. Well, at least 17 people have been killed, and authorities fear that death toll could yet rise. Residents have meanwhile been assessing the damage to their homes, 2,000 of which have been completely destroyed. The Trump administration has faced criticism this week after announcing plans to repeal an Obama-era climate change rule to limit carbon emissions from coal-fired power plants. Well, the head of the Environment Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, announced on Monday that he'd sign an order to scrap the Clean Power Act, saying that the war on coal is over. Well, the move comes just months after President Trump announced his withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord. The number of the week is $800 million. That's the sum that the Canadian government says it's going to spend to compensate its so-called stolen children. Between 1964 and 1985, thousands of Aboriginal children were removed from their families and placed in foster care or even adopted overseas. Catherine Viette reports now on Canada's dark chapter known as the 60s Scoop.
Canada's Indigenous population is finally being heard. The government has just announced it will pay up to 750 million Canadian dollars to victims of the 60s Scoop, Aboriginal children taken from their families.
These are essential elements to begin to right the wrongs of this dark and painful chapter, the 60s Scoop.
Starting in 1964 and continuing for more than 2 decades, thousands of Aboriginal children were forcibly removed from their homes and placed with non-Aboriginal families in Canada, the United States, and even in Europe. The victims have long demanded compensation for the psychological and cultural damage caused by this uprooting.
I had something on my back the whole time, which was this, the culture, loss of language. It's dragged with me my whole life.
A Canadian public television investigation discovered that some of these children were sold by adoption agencies to families in the U.S. and abroad for up to $10,000. Many victims feel the government's compensation offer is insufficient.
The government is getting off extremely cheap on this.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who took office in 2015, has pledged to fix the government's relationship with its Aboriginals.
The Government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country for failing them so profoundly.
1.4 million Indigenous people live in Canada. They have long been subjected to a policy of forced assimilation, which only just ended in the 1990s.
And finally, football fans in Argentina are breathing a sigh of relief after the country's national team sealed its spot in next year's Football World Cup in Russia. Well, the 3-1 victory over Ecuador was down to some messy magic after the star striker scored a hat-trick. Argentina now joins fellow Latin American nations Brazil, Uruguay and Colombia, who have also qualified for the major tournament. Well, that's all for this week. Do tune in at the same time next week. You're watching France 24.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa on France 24 and France24.com.
You might watch France 24 in English, but don't forget, France 24 is also broadcast in French, Arabic and Spanish.
Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a las noticias de France 24.
Available on cable and satellite systems and online media in France and around the world.